it's easy to say, our most important thing we can contribute to is revenue, right? So let's put all of our time towards working on projects that grow our top line. Well, in doing that, we're leaving behind compliance, we're leaving behind tech debt, we're leaving behind efficiency gains, operational gains, all of which will add value to the company, and all of which are worth our time.
Welcome to RevOps Rockstars, in pursuit of unicorns. I'm David Carnes.
And I'm Jarin Chu. Join us as we interview RevOps leaders to explore the challenges they have faced, the biggest lessons they've learned, and what they think makes a RevOps rockstar.
This show is brought to you by OpFocus, on a mission to help companies run their businesses better by letting you focus on growth while we scale your operations. Let's get this show on the road. Today's guest is someone we are pumped to speak with. He has over 9 years of experience with business systems. He's an experienced leader who has built and led teams across a variety of departments. He's a strategist who knows how to put words into action. Head of business systems and the data team at Invicti Security, Glen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So we love to start off by asking, right off the bat, what's something that you've had to learn the hard way in RevOps?
Yeah, it's a great question, David, and I have literally dozens of answers for it. Anyone who's at a small company, a growing company, learns a lot of things on the fly. And so I think we could make an entire podcast out of just this one topic. I think the one that I keep coming back to is the importance of getting stakeholders, even if it's just one, very senior level stakeholder involved and properly engaged in major projects from the start. And what I mean by that is partial engagement is one thing, and that happens on most every project where you have a steering committee, you meet every month, you may send them email updates. There's a difference between that and someone who's willing to go to bat for the project, both with the executive team, especially in meetings where, the project manager like myself or someone else isn't present and people are talking about, why are we doing this thing? Is this going to solve our problems? You need someone to be able to credibly defend why you're doing the project, and then also to defend it with their team and push usage and be someone who's actually been in the trenches and done the work that they're doing, who can credibly say, hey, this will make your life better. Because coming from me, it just is incredible because I haven't necessarily done the work that they're doing. So really, that's the one I keep coming back to. I've seen projects fail because you don't have it. I've seen projects succeed because you do have it. It's rare that I've seen projects succeed when you don't have it.
Is there a negotiation that takes place to line up that exec sponsor for your projects?
Yeah, so I think there are two components to it. The first is there has to be a negotiation at the executive level. So, my manager, for instance, may not be the exec sponsor I'm looking for, but oftentimes he has to be the one to engage with the right person to help bring them across the line in addition to me. So I think that's an important piece of it. And then you have to have an honest conversation with them before you actually get into the project to make sure that everyone's aligned and you avoid surprises later. So be very clear, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what we're not trying to accomplish. And if you do those things, generally speaking, once you get into the project, it's a lot easier to get it going.
So I'd like to paint a picture for our listeners today, Chris, on how everything you've mentioned just now around that exec alignment, sponsor alignment fits in the context of your business. Your company, Invicti Security, serves the IT, governance, finance, healthcare, education industries. You're almost at 400 employees, and I think in 2021, Summit Partners, which is a Boston-based private equity firm, acquired the company for $625 million. In your words, first of all, what does Invicti do?
Yeah, so Invicti's core product does what's called dynamic application security testing, or DAST. The way to think about DAST is basically, every application that's accessible via the internet was programmed initially years and years ago, right? As time goes by, the AppSec best principles tend to change. New things are discovered, new issues are discovered, new vulnerabilities are discovered. And so what may have been secure 5-10 years ago when an application was originally created is no longer going to be secure today. And so, ideally you can have some sort of system that sits on top of your production applications and monitors them, and flags to you when those vulnerabilities pop up. And that's exactly what dynamic application security testing does. That's Invicti's product.
And that almost makes too much sense. I know in ops, we have the concept of tech debt. In this case, it sounds like there's security debt, where over time, if you're not actively looking for it, how would you know that something is out of date? And there are loopholes now for folks to go, attack.
Yep, that's right.
Your background, Chris, is a bit different from our typical podcast guest background. We have a lot of RevOps folks, but your purview is actually a little bit broader and maybe a little bit more oriented towards the tech side. So you are head of the business systems team. Paint me a picture of what the responsibilities are and how big is the team that you work with?
A lot of times in a lot of companies, it can vary based on the company. In some companies, your systems teams roll up more into IT. In other companies, your systems teams roll up more into your head of revenue operations, and we're more of the latter group. We, when I joined, we had a larger revenue operations team. A few of those folks have since left, and we've aligned, some of the smaller the subgroups of revenue operations, marketing operations, forecasting, those sorts of things within the line of business. So now I sit alone, but I also tend to take on some sales operations tasks as well as they come up, because we don't really have a sales operations team. So what that means is that the team that I built has to be a group of generalists who have a diverse array of experience, but also are very eager to try new things, to learn the latest technology and the latest reporting techniques, what have you, in order to get things done. So high level, I manage 3 teams. One is our data team. One is business systems. Revenue systems is the specific area that I manage. We have a finance systems team that rolls up separately from me. And then I also manage our deal desk. Deal desk is obviously the most ops team that I manage. Everyone else is more of a business systems analyst that does ops work occasionally. All told, we have, I believe I have 8 people directly in my team. We use a lot of outsourced help as well as needed in order to augment the team. But again, we all kind of flow in between the 3 verticals that I manage as required.
And since you manage deal desk, you also own some of those sales operations tasks. Can you give me a sense of how big is the BDR, SDR / sales team that you're supporting with these 8 people?
Yeah. So BDR, SDR, inside sales is, call it, somewhere in the 20-person range. The sales team, account executives, call it somewhere in the 30 to 40 range. And then we also, frankly, I spend probably a majority of my time working with our customer success team, because we have a lot of operational and efficiency complexities there that we can deal with with systems, and that team is probably in the 40 to 50 range.
We've heard in prior podcast guests conversations that some of the folks in RevOps today are actually prioritizing things like CS ops over sales ops, for example, just given the climate of the year we're in and wanting to make sure we prioritize retention and reduce churn and that sort of thing. Can you quickly mention, since you said you spend majority of your time in CS, what are the kinds of initiatives you have been leading in CS that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so one of the highest strategic priorities for our Chief Customer Officer is to add more automation for our smallest segment band of customers. So trying to figure out what that means in practice is actually a pretty tricky problem, right? I mean, should all customers within a certain size range be treated the same? Should we segment them differently based on what product they have, based on how long they've been a customer, based on what their geography is? And so, there's definitely a lot more that we have to figure out there. But a good starting point for us has been thinking about just the simple problem of how do we communicate with them. So traditionally, we still have had CSMs who've done a lot of the manual outreach, even on the hundreds and hundreds of our smallest customers, and they just can't keep up with it. So, what it means for our customers is that they don't hear from us that often. And ideally, we want to change that. And so we, recently purchased Segment to sort of serve, as our CDP for a bunch of use cases. But one of the first use cases that we're going to be putting it towards is using it to actually segment, the name applies well here, our customer base, to be able to do customized outreach for them, both in the product and via email. So that's something that is really exciting to me. Another thing that we've been working with them on is implementing a new CS oriented tool for them, kind of like a Gainsight or a Churn Zero, that gives them a hub of activity with the information they specifically seek in order to do their job, versus what we had before, which was more of a generic, sales view that both our sales and CS and frankly our inside sales teams all used.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases over the years, CS maybe had the maybe impression of being second-class citizens even to sales, because sales is the team that's actively bringing in revenue. But this, I would really say this is the year of CS, right? They are the ones to shine. They're the ones to ensure that the revenue is coming in, customers are happy, you're deflecting cases and reducing the amount of unexpected churn as much as possible. So it makes sense that you're investing in these initiatives right now.
Yeah, 100%. We're lucky. We have some great strategic minds as well on that team who are very operationally oriented. So that makes my job a lot easier, because they, in a lot of cases, are able to define here's what we want the process to look like. And the process should always lead the technology, especially in cases like this, because it just makes change management a lot easier, and you aren't jamming something into a process that doesn't fit. So I'm excited about what the year ahead of us holds.
So across inside sales, CS, I think you're supporting something like 100 or so folks. You've got a team of 8. You mentioned earlier that you actually rely on a good amount of outsource and external help. How do you determine what you keep in-house and what do you outsource?
Yeah, it's a great question. I use a couple of principles for it. I think the most fundamental principle is separating the world between run the business work and strategic projects work. Run the business work is, I think of it, and the edges are pretty blurred here, but I think of it as pretty much anything that can be completed in a sprint or less. So 2 weeks of work or less. Oftentimes it's things that can be completed in, 2 minutes to an hour, so something like that. A lot of it's day-to-day stuff that people raise, things that are broken, but it could also be net new functionality, but it's more on the smaller side. What I've found is that if you have your internal team working on anything much bigger than that sprint-sized project, they tend to get overwhelmed and get distracted by the other day-to-day stuff, and you don't ever get anything done, at least amongst the big things. So I tend to push anything that's bigger than that into kind of the strategic projects bucket, and I'll bring in outsourced help to do that. A lot of times for us, the bigger projects are much bigger. We're talking about 6-month implementations, not 2 sprint implementations. But that's a principle I try to adhere to. The other piece that I think is really important is domain expertise, and then kind of the seamless before advisory side of things. So if we're implementing a new system, for instance, that we only have limited understanding of course, you're going to bring in an expert to do that. That's another great place to outsource it. And then if you're trying to solve a gnarly business problem that maybe you've seen at one other company, but you'd love to know how 20 other companies have solved it, that's another great time to bring in outsourced help as well.
So Chris, you've described owning the data team, the business systems team, deal desk. I'm really curious, what does your day-to-day entail?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every day is different. I think that one of the beauties that I think can frustrate a lot of people about a company of our size is just the dynamic nature of the day to day, week to week, month to month. It's really hard for me to put a finger on what you know our priorities will be next week, let alone next month. And we try our best to plan, to plan and roadmap and do all of that. But a lot of times things are just dynamic and they just change. And so that pretty much sums up my day, right? I mean, I think that if I had to categorize it, if I had to bucket it, there are probably three main things that I focus a lot of my time on. One of them is people and team management. So the people management side is the hands down the most important part of my job. Really lucky to have an awesome team. And so keeping them eager, keeping them feeling engaged, making sure they're working on things that are interesting to them, making sure they aren't burned out, which is a huge risk. Those are all, the jobs 1, A, B, and C for me on a day-to-day basis. I also manage a broader team, right? So I'm, in charge of putting in structures. How often do we meet? How do we do planning? How do we do execution? What do we prioritize and when? So I think that's kind of fits in one big bucket. The second bucket is more of almost being a customer success manager for our internal organization. We have a lot of stakeholders. We operate at the confluence of pretty much every team at the company. And so making sure that I know when I meet with, everyone at the team, what is the biggest 1 to 2 problems that are top of mind for them, and can we help? And if we can help, what are reasonable projects that we can build out in order to help them? When should we do them? How should we do them? Who should own them? So that part of planning is obviously a big part of my job. And then execution ends up taking up at least 50% of my time. And that's everything from just pushing along projects from more of a manager standpoint. Can I help unblock things? Have we tried this? That sort of thing, to spending time plugging gaps, just in Salesforce, pulling reports, helping with audit, helping with testing. It's possible to avoid that stuff. And frankly, I enjoy it.
So given that every day is different and you are really involved in a number of things, how do you measure success in your role?
Yeah, another great question. It's interesting because traditional orthodoxy about roles in companies like ours is you have to block out all the noise. You have to focus on finding the 2 to 3 things for your team that are the most valuable for the company, and say no to everything else and work on those 2 to 3 things. And I found in my career that, if you can make that work, that's great. And anyone who can, it's awesome. I mean, that is a good strategy. I found it to be really difficult to do that in practice. Because again, we sit at the confluence of the needs of a lot of different teams, and some of those teams do not, it's easy to say, our most important thing we can contribute to is revenue, right? So let's put all of our time towards working on projects that grow our top line. Well, in doing that, we're leaving behind compliance, we're leaving behind tech debt, we're leaving behind efficiency gains, operational gains, all of which will add value to the company. And all of which are worth our time. And so for me, success is more about the journey than it is about the destination. The destination is really important. What are you accomplishing? But how you get there is also really important, because we need to have a good partnership and a good relationship with everyone around us. So it's, again, it's talking to the top stakeholders, understanding what their problems are, trying to scope good solutions, and really making everyone feel like we are working with them. We are a partner to them. And if we're doing that, and we're executing work and completing it, and that work was well planned using the structures we put in place, that is success for me.
The tension you're calling out, Chris, in terms of the how you're sitting at that confluence, right? How there are, you're trying to find a focus, and yet everything you're doing technically affects revenue. And the challenge I'm also hearing is, how do you address both the issues that your stakeholders are calling out that are immediate pain points, short term, very visible, and some of those things you mentioned towards the end of your comment there, which are more strategic items, takes longer, will impact revenue, but maybe not in the next month, maybe not even in the next quarter, maybe it's next year, right? Like that balance, I'm curious to have your take on, because focus is probably one of the hardest pieces to a cross-functional role like RevOps in general, but certainly in your business systems type of function.
Right. Yeah, it's true. But focus is, is a really difficult thing to achieve. I also think you made a great point about timeframes, short term, long term. There's a risk, which we fall into all the time, which is that, because the company needs something yesterday, you build a subpar solution to achieve that thing versus, there is always a way you can build a solution in a system to a problem that is more scalable, that's less brittle, it's going to be more reliable, easier to maintain. And that trade-off is really tricky as well. So the business problem could be exactly the same. But how you get there is something that can vary dramatically. And the biggest battles that I tend to fight internally are trying to get people to see the value in doing the latter and doing things the right way, instead of just hacking together some reports and dashboards and Excel sheets that will get us there, much faster, but, won't be able to scale.
So Chris, I'm really curious, given that all that you do and all that you're responsible for, what, if anything, keeps you up at night?
Well, first off, David, I have a 20-month-old. So what keeps me up at night is usually not work things. It's usually something else. But if I am kept up enough by work things, it feels like it's always something different. I think the number one thing, though, that I'm most worried about waking up in the morning, signing on and seeing is that some piece of legacy technology that my team didn't build that existed before any of us were at the company, but that now drives some really important business process has failed, and we don't know how to fix it. And that is a risk. It's been borne out in the past, and it's always a risk that's out there. And that is honestly number one on my list is that kind of dread.
It sounds like a recurring nightmare for someone in your role.
Yes, it is.
Chris, we're talking a lot about already the many, many things that your cross-functional team is trying to do internally. You mentioned fighting battles on bringing that strategic, maybe more longer term payoff project to the table and helping stakeholders understand the power of that. I'm sure you also get pulled into other cross-functional special projects. And we hear this a lot with folks who lead business systems. They end up, because of their technology background, because of their ability to work with lots of stakeholders, you're really the task force that's considered special forces. You get parachuted in. What are some of these cross-functional corporate level initiatives that you've worked on as of late that you've been proud of, or you were like, wow, that was quite the beast?
So, excuse me. At Invicti, we had last year was a pretty big year for deploying new systems or for re-architecting existing systems and doing kind of full top to bottom rebuilds. So we did a major re-architecture of our CPQ instance. CPQ is the heartbeat, if not the heartbeat. Salesforce itself might be the heartbeat, but it is a major artery where if it fails, it's a big problem. And so swapping it out midstream is really difficult. And that's the challenge there is making sure people understand the why, understand what they're getting out of it, and are therefore willing to put up with some inevitable headaches that come up with it. And by the way, that applies both to your internal team, so my deal desk team, in addition to our sales reps. I mean, the amount of headaches that we had to put up with just internal to my team dealing with the transition were huge. And it's all about going back to the why. Like, why did we do this? All systems projects are like this. There is pain initially as people adjust to the new way of doing things, as we work through bugs that there's no way we could have caught during testing. Things do get better. And so just kind of keeping the morale high and pushing people through that in both sides. And I view that as a big part of my job. Even if I don't have the in-depth day-to-day technical knowledge that my teams have, I have an obligation to everyone to to help make sure we're, thinking about things as positively as possible. So we got through it. And I think that was that was a big one for last year. We had a couple of other major project deployments or major system deployments. One of them was Marketo. We converted from Pardot to Marketo. That was mostly confined to our finance team, but what made that one particularly challenging was we had to weave it into our existing Salesforce instance, which was built to support Pardot, and it supported Pardot for 3 years, and no one really understood. Again, because no one on my team had been at the company when Pardot had been implemented, how all of the pieces fit together. And so there's kind of this architecture question, enterprise architecture question that comes up in any cross-functional project of like, who actually knows how this stuff works and can make decisions on it. And if not, who needs to step up and actually action things. And so that was a fun challenge for that one.
Yeah, these two are great examples. I think when you mentioned the CPQ re-architecture project, this is the first time I've heard it called, the artery for the business or the heartbeat, but it really is. I mean, if sales can't efficiently and effectively get quotes out, accurate quotes out, the right discounts out, that directly impacts the bottom line. And I've never thought of it, but it really is like doing open heart surgery. You've got to keep the patient alive and breathing while you'll swap out something that's very, very important and central to them. Yep. You mentioned the importance also about going back to why. And that's a point that, I'm so glad to hear, because there are times when, we'll hear about projects. Maybe we've spent a lot of time on it and we've worked on initiatives alongside our customers for months and months and months. But let's say an executive stakeholder steps away and suddenly folks are like, hey, you just launched this new thing. We don't like it. This isn't what we used to have. This isn't, what we're used to. And the why is so essential, because it's easy to then slip back and say, okay, well, just do things the old way. But there was a reason why we decided, as a business team or, consultants with a stakeholder to decide to move forward with this big, bold initiative, right? To help with growth or whatever other kind of big moves are on the horizon. So that going back to why, I think is really resonating with me, Chris.
Yeah. Jarin, that's a great point about kind of people's tendency to revert back, even if it's mentally, to the way things were before, almost, having kind of a lust for the past, right? It's like, oh, things used to be so much easier. Change management is really a continuous exercise. People think of it as a one-time discrete thing that you just do right around the go live of a new system. But that's usually not enough, because you'll train someone once, they may be distracted during the training. They'll, click through the quiz answers until they get them right, and then they'll move on with their life. And they really aren't any better off in their understanding of the new system than maybe they were in the old system. And so within months, you start to see people go back into old habits. People figure out their own way of using the new system, maybe whatever they find out to be easiest. And that's a problem that we've had with CPQ specifically is, people just want to get through their day and want to get quotes out. And so they find the workarounds that work for them. And so finding a way to bring them back in, keep them in the right lanes, which for their sake will be better off, for the deal desk sake will be better off, for the company as a whole will be better off, is a big part of change management. That never ends.
One question related to change management, I'm going to tie these two comments you mentioned about the Pardot to Marketo transition and the CPQ implementation or re-implementation together. You mentioned in the Pardot example, everyone who had initially implemented it understood the system architecture had already left the company. So when you're rolling out a new initiative like the CPQ re-architecture, what are some of the things you have introduced to this part of the process to help prevent from that kind of knowledge gap from happening again if you go on vacation or if your team turns over or folks, get promoted into different kinds of roles? Yeah,
it's a great question. Documentation, I think, is one of the best ways of solving that problem, but it doesn't solve every aspect of the problem. I think that, the technical side can be figured out. If you get a smart person in there with at least documentation that's 80% accurate and useful, they can solve any problem that's occurring on the back end. The thing actually that I worry most about is that people leave who regularly respond to questions from users, and there isn't a person who can step in that has the knowledge to provide a quick answer of like, oh, you're getting that error. This is how you work around it. Or, oh, like this is taking you 2 hours. Here's a better way of doing it that will take you 20 minutes. So we're actually investing heavily in that side of things. We're bringing in a tool called Spec-It, which sort of sits on top of Salesforce, and is a bunch of different functionality. But the place we're starting with it is a pretty simple kind of search and discovery function that has documentation with pretty good search functionality on top of it that allows users to type in, I hit this error, what should I do? The short-term benefits of that is that we'll get a lot fewer questions on the deal desk. The longer-term benefit of that is that will live forever. And so that will persist, even after folks, leave the company.
That's great. I think that's learning from your predecessors and also making who might come after have an easier job.
Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned Spec-It. For those who are listening, I believe we've got a conversation with Laura Wheeler from Spec-It also in the queue. So look forward to that episode. Chris, let's talk about some higher level conversations as it relates to the relationship with your board and investors. So Summit Partners is wholly owns the company now. I'm curious, what is the relationship between your role in business systems and the team at Summit?
So from a standpoint of the investors themselves and the board, I don't have a lot of direct interaction with them. The data team that rolls up into me is regularly involved in answering questions for them. And so that's probably the closest I get to that. It's reporting on revenue and retention and those sorts of things on a pretty regular basis as the board demands. I tend to have a lot more interaction with more of the operational side of our investors. And it found it very helpful, for a couple of reasons. I think one of them is what I referenced earlier about outsourced help. An operating partner at an investment firm is going to have seen dozens of companies. They'll have seen what works and what doesn't. And so tapping into that knowledge is a really great opportunity for me. And the other piece of it is sometimes if you need to get things done, operating teams will have, even analyst folks who can, work on things to help out the company. And those folks are not distracted by the day-to-day as much as you are. So that can be really beneficial.
Chris, you mentioned that you can lean on analyst folks from Summit Partners operating team to help with some of the initiatives, and they're less distracted. What are some of those examples that you've been able to lean on the operating team for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think from an analytical standpoint, they bring a unique perspective about how to leverage the data that comes out of Salesforce in a way that paints a really good picture for tracking operational metrics. So they usually will think about reporting in a different way by, for instance, kind of implementing a funnel-oriented model on top of pretty much anything, right? So you can think about, if you're trying to schedule a meeting, the meeting needs to be scheduled. We've tried to reach out to schedule it. We've scheduled it. We've completed it. Maybe it's resulted in like an opportunity being created, right? That can very easily be looked at as a funnel. And so that mentality is what I found most useful. And obviously they can do the work too. In a lot of cases, they have the skills to do that. But bringing interesting ideas to the fore for reporting is also, really beneficial.
Great. And I know the operating team, because they are working with lots of portfolio companies, they have their own networks. I'm sure they come in handy when it comes to things like introductions and recommendations as well.
100%. Yeah. I've been lucky to participate in a number of conversations with other Summit portfolio companies about, what's worked and what hasn't for them. So, and it's two ways, right? So a lot of times I will participate as someone who's done something before to tell them, here's what you can expect, here are the pitfalls, all of that from, moving to Marketo, for instance, or from doing a major data cleanup effort, those sorts of things. They're some of the most useful conversations that I've had.
So, Chris, the next two questions are very much connected to your title, Head of Business Systems and Data Team. To start with, on the business system side, I'm really curious, is there a tech stack tool that you just couldn't live without right now?
Yeah. I think over the last 3 to 6 months, what's moved to the top of my list there is Ringlead. So Ringlead is a Zoom Info product. There are other solutions that do a similar thing. So Cloud Dingo is another example. Basically, for those who don't know, it's a record and data management tool. So it sits on top of your Salesforce instance and allows you to manipulate records in a way that's a lot easier than doing it in Salesforce. So generally speaking, I'm a pretty big fan of moving as much business logic out of Salesforce as you can into things that are easier to use and manipulate things with. So whether it be lead assignment and lead routing, how to handle duplicate records, how to handle records when someone leaves. Maybe someone leaves and you want to reassign their account and you want to do it on an automated basis. Ringlead does all of that. You can automate it, and you can also do it on sort of a one-time basis. And it's been transformative for us since we've started using it aggressively here.
Well, that's an endorsement to hear that a tool's been transformative. I'm really glad for you and your team. So on the data team side, I'm curious, where do you go to get an at-a-glance view of the KPIs that you use to run the business?
Yeah, so predominantly it's Tableau. We definitely have a number of users who prefer to use data directly from Salesforce. I'm a fan of trying to consolidate everything and make sure everyone is viewing the same numbers from the same source. But people have their reasons for doing it, and I'm not, I'm obviously not going to try to hold people back from that. But generally speaking, it's going to be Tableau, which now sits on top of Snowflake for us.
Well, that sounds like a winning combination. Taking one big step back and just looking way out into the future, I'm curious, what is exciting to you when you think about the future of systems?
Yeah, I think the next 10 years are going to be transformative in a similar way to how, maybe the early to mid 2000s to, 2010 to 2015 were. That period obviously was transformed by moving into cloud-based business systems. I think the next 10 years, you're going to see a couple of different trends, at least the ones that are most interesting to me. One of them, I referenced a bit earlier with Ringlead, which is moving business logic out of kind of your behemoth monolithic CRM. I think between Ringlead and reverse ETL systems like Census and just the ease of use of Snowflake, BigQuery, whatever you use for your data lake, that combination will allow a lot of companies to make their data lake their source of record for everything across the enterprise, and then more easily manipulate it, push it into Salesforce or whatever their CRM is, and dramatically simplify their CRM, which will in turn make change management a lot easier, and will remove a lot of the kind of reliability and legacy issues that you see in CRMs today. So I really think there's this disaggregation trend that's going to be picking up steam here moving into the future. But that pales in comparison to what I think the biggest impact is going to be, which is AI, which is obviously what everyone is talking about right now. And there are already ways in which artificial intelligence is having a pretty big impact on teams, generative AI especially, using it to compose emails, using it to compose, tweets and slide decks and all of that. That's the tip of the iceberg. I see, especially as an ops person, I see the ops role being transformed by chat AI to the point where we don't have to do day-to-day run the business tasks anymore because they can be done for us. And then we can focus on kind of the higher level stuff that I think everyone wants to work on. So that there's finally, with ChatGPT and all that, very clear path for me for what that looks like. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I think it within the next 5 years, we're going to be in a very different place.
And Salesforce made their announcement around their AI-driven chat tool at Trailblazer DX just a few weeks ago. So we'll see that later this year. It'll be interesting to see how that fits in with the platform.
Yep, 100%.
So staying on that thread, what in RevOps would you like to automate?
It's a good question. I will say, going back to your what keeps me up in the middle of the night question from earlier, automation in general tends to be one of those things that really comes back and causes more challenges for us than they ultimately solve. And that's coming from a position of, I realized that before automation was a thing that was easy to implement, I think that life was a lot harder. So, our life is better. And so a little bit of this is just kind of, complaining about, about our life being, comparatively good. But to me, the ultimate kind of holy grail for automation in general is not so much what's the next thing that can be incrementally automated, but how do we create an overall structure in which automations work, where it's a lot easier to make major systems changes without having to worry about every corner of your system firing off automations that have adverse impacts for your business. It basically makes every major project you want to do a waterfall project versus an agile project. It's really hard to do agile in an environment like Salesforce. And so it's kind of an indirect answer to your question. What do I wish I could automate? I wish I could work better with automation. I wish there was a way to make it function, in a way that was easier for us to work with.
Sure. And even turn it on, turn it off when you need to, and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So we'd like to talk about you for a bit. You're based in Denver, Colorado. You did an undergraduate in philosophy, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
Love to hear that. You're at University of Michigan. You did an MBA at UC Boulder. Amazing school, amazing town. Your previous positions, you were head of strategic programs at Jump Cloud. You were a group product manager of business systems at Palantir for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, given all these things in your background, including a degree in philosophy, how did you get into SaaS business systems and ops?
Right. Yeah, I wish I could tell you there was a grand plan that led me to philosophy in the first place, and then from philosophy to where I am today. I think what's interesting about revenue ops to me is as I've gotten closer and closer to the discipline and gotten to know more and more people, it's an area where you get a very diverse array of backgrounds. People come to RevOps from some of them from very traditional backgrounds. They studied business, got into revenue ops, but some of them came from sales, obviously. But some people came from, frankly, very disparate places where you wouldn't expect them to end up somewhere like revenue ops. I think that's what makes it a really interesting field, is that the doors are open. If you're a generalist, if you can think, analytically, but also in kind of a systems manner, if you're good with process, if you're good with getting things done, you have a spot, in RevOps. So as I think about my career, that's kind of how the script played out for me. I mean, there's some linearity there in that I've been in the tech industry, for 10 plus years. I started in product management, in sort of a customer facing, almost like a customer success role, but it was hybrid CS. And I was working with our product team to build new functionality, and then moved to Palantir doing customer facing work, which was very product management oriented. Then moved to our internal team doing product management. And then that kind of morphed into more of this business systems leadership role, which encompassed a lot more team management, vendor management, operational work, that kind of stuff you see today. And so really that's that's what it was. I mean, I was, trying to find a place that made the most sense for my skills and interests. And that's, it's just been sort of a period of trial and error to get there.
So if you could go back to that early point in your career and give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, and I don't, I wouldn't have played my, you know, played my career any differently. I don't think, but, if I told myself 10 years ago, I'd end up where I was today, um, and wanted to prepare myself better for it, I would have started earlier on learning the technical side. It's much easier in a career path to start in a highly technical role, be it, an analyst at a consulting firm or, an ops analyst at a company or a software engineer, and then move into management. That is to move into management and then realize, oh, I wish I had, more technical expertise here. Let me add that, to the toolkit. Obviously, there are tons of resources. You can, find them everywhere online in order to bolster that. But you really get the experience by doing it in your day-to-day job. And I just don't have time to do it and haven't had time for years to really learn by doing. And so I think that's it, right? 10 years ago, if I had taught myself Salesforce, found the time to do it, found some opportunities to do it in my job, replace Salesforce with any other business system, I think that would have been beneficial for me today.
Yeah, I can echo that a bit. I think for the longest time, David's seen me throughout the years. I've wondered, should I go explore the development side of things? Should I spend more time hands-on? And ultimately, I think the reality is the path is never linear. I think it is easier to learn technical earlier on. But being able to build your path and carve out, a very interesting set of skill sets unique to the experiences you've had. I mean, Chris, your time at Palantir, I know I always wonder, like, what exactly do they do, right? Like that's given you a very unique set of experiences and exposure to do the job probably only you can.
Right. That's right. And Palantir, at its core, it was just a group of, entrepreneurially minded people building stuff for customers. I mean, it's all very data oriented, right? Like solve a big data driven problem for a company where they hadn't been able to solve it before. That was always the kind of the entry point. But from there, the teams that were deployed against these problems had to just kind of figure it out. And so that's always been the mentality that I've taken, obviously with me during my time at Palantir, but since then is, there are going to be multiple times per week where you have a business problem. No one has seen it before. There isn't a clear path, best practice way of solving it. Someone has to figure it out. So let's figure out who that person is going to be. And if it's not them, it's going to be me, like that's how it is.
It's a lot of intrapreneurial skills.
Exactly. Yep.
We've asked you to do a lot of reflecting, but if we look ahead again, what are some of the things that might be on your career bucket list?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be interesting for me is, traditionally I've gone into companies that are, in the growth stage, right? So they've been, like kind of to a point where they have had established systems architectures for a while. And the mandate has been for me to come in and, build a team around it and, get things on rails and, get things to a scalable place where, the company feels like, oh, yeah, maybe if we want to go public, maybe if we want to be purchased, if we want to just keep growing as a private company, those things are options. And that's been great. And if I continue doing that for the rest of my career, I will be a happy camper. But I think it's also a really interesting challenge to go into a company that is so new that you're building it from scratch. And you can learn a whole new set of lessons the hard way by doing things wrong. But you can also implement a lot of the lessons you've already learned about the things that go wrong 5 years down the road if you don't make the right decision to start. So I think that's number one for me is someday that might be an interesting challenge.
I would say that a brand new startup often feels like raising a child from their baby stages. You've got a 10-month-old, you've got a wide purview of responsibilities. What do you do to recover and unwind from just the amount of brain work you need to do in your workday?
Yeah, well, being in Colorado, I am contractually obligated to say spending time outside is a big part of my routine, which is true. It's not. No one paid me to say that, but that's definitely on the top of my list. I think getting time in the fresh air, whether it's hiking, walking, just enjoying the better than average weather we have here is really important. And the other side of it is just spending time with with my son. My wife and I just like the thing that we marvel at, which I think is everyone knows, but you don't like know till you're in the middle of it, is how in the moment kids are. And so you can be wrapped up in work stuff, personal stuff. The moment before you start playing with your kid, and then all of that changes the minute he starts running around and saying crazy stuff and all that. So that is to be super rewarding, and it really helps end the day usually.
So do you have one of those backpacks that he can fit in so you guys can go out adventuring?
Not yet. We might get that soon, or he's walking, so it might just be trial by fire. Let's start going on family hikes.
I think that sounds great.
Yeah.
So Chris, what resources do you turn to for your learning?
Yeah. As I said earlier, learning by doing is the place I always start. And that's not to say that there aren't resources that, anyone could go to get better at something before they start trying to do it. But for me, the best way has always been to identify a problem. So I want to make a report, work better, or I want to look at a flow in Salesforce, or I want to, try to update a formula field, and try to do it myself, inevitably run into issues, and then seek out answers. And so, Stack Overflow, Trailhead for Salesforce, those sorts of things. And, pretty much anything is Googleable. But you don't, what I've found is that if you start by searching those things, you miss a lot of the nuance. Then if you start by actually, with the problem in mind, trying to solve that problem. So I think that's sort of how I think about it.
I think that's a really good point. And you can often find a lot of wrong ways to do it by Googling as
Correct.
well.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anyone else that you think might be a good fit for the podcast?
Great question. So my first manager in business systems, I think it's always worth a shout out. Her name is Maggie Astolfi. She was at Palantir. She's at Google now. She taught me pretty much everything I know about people management, which I think is probably, like I said earlier, probably the most important part of my job. She always did things the right way. She always was great about planning and making sure we finished things. She's tremendous. So I'll shout her out.
Well, that's an endorsement. Fantastic. Chris, where can people find you? Are you on LinkedIn or another social media platform?
I am on LinkedIn. I do not create content yet, though I may someday. But yeah, everyone can find me on LinkedIn.
And how can somebody learn more about Invicti?
Our website, Invicti.com, is a great place to start. We post on LinkedIn, actually, and other platforms, a lot of kind of blogs, thought pieces, articles about any of a number of security related topics. And so I, welcome everyone when you see those to click into them and learn a little more. It's not always just about Invicti. It's oftentimes about the wild world of AppSec, which is always changing, always challenging, and always very interesting.
So, Chris, it's really been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I've learned a lot listening to your very thoughtful answers, and we're just so glad that we had you come join us.
Thank you. It's been great talking to both of you as well.
And as usual, we want to thank everyone who stayed with us in the last 40, 50 minutes, listened to many of Chris's gems, many metaphors. I still think CPQ as open heart surgery might be my favorite. And if you learned something today or laughed at one of our silly metaphors, please tell someone about the podcast and subscribe in your favorite podcasting app. Thank you again, Chris, for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
And this has been another exciting episode of RevOps Rockstars. See you next time.
Stay classy, rock stars. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you so much for joining us. For show notes and other episodes, visit revopsrockstars.com. RevOps Rockstars is sponsored by OpFocus. Visit opfocus.com to learn more about how OpFocus helps SaaS companies scale their revenue operations.